Okay, welcome to the Unit 7 review. These are going to be the topics, terms, events, people that you will need to know for your upcoming test on this unit. First, the category that we're looking at is federal action against big business. Each of these different actions that the federal government takes is meant to regulate business. Okay, we're going to start with the Sherman Antitrust Act. Remember, trust means monopoly, anti means against. The Sherman Antitrust Act is going to be passed in 1890. Its purpose was to regulate the practices of big business, but it was unsuccessful because it was too weak, too vague, could not be applied, with the exception of the Northern Securities Company case. The Northern Securities Company was the first time that we successfully used the Sherman Antitrust Act. Teddy Roosevelt busted up this trust of the Railroad Northern Security Company. But because of how unsuccessful the Sherman Antitrust Act was for many years, the Clayton Antitrust Act will be passed in 1914. This act is meant to accomplish what the Sherman Antitrust Act did not do. So the Clayton Antitrust Act, again, regulating the practices of big business, going after specific actions of monopolies, defining what a monopoly is and what it cannot be, more successful anti-against monopoly act. The Interstate Commerce Act was more regulation from the federal government for big business. This act was regulating trade, because commerce means trade, between the states, interstate. So, what practices were being used really in the railroad industry. The Food and Drug Administration, you guys know it as the FDA. This is another regulation of business. This is going to come after the jungle, seeing what was in our food from that muckraker novel. We have the Food and Drug Administration monitoring what is happening, what's going into our food, what's going into our medication, making sure that it's safe for consumers. The Federal Trade Commission is a federal agency that is setting out to regulate trade within the United States, make sure that advertising is regulated, making sure these monopolies aren't taking advantage of consumers. What each of these have in common, though, from the Sherman Antitrust Act, Clayton Antitrust Act, Interstate Commerce, Food and Drug Administration, Federal Trade Commission, these are all federal actions to regulate business activities. Groups and movements that we need to remember for the test. The progressive movement, remember this movement is going to be put out to make progress, make reforms, set out to fix the issues within that were produced in the Gilded Age, help the urban city poor, regulate industry. Remember, fixing all the problems that were created in the Gilded Age. The Granger movement, this is going to be the movement of the farmers, agriculture, asking for the government to regulate railroads, asking for the government to regulate the banks. Remember, we wanted to get help for the farmers who were not being paid attention to, or at least being helped the way that they wanted to be helped. The temperance movement. This is going to be a movement that is pushing for prohibition, the 18th Amendment. Remember the Women's Christian Temperance Union fighting to get rid of alcohol in the United States. The labor movement. This is unions pushing for better conditions, shorter hours, higher wages, those bread and butter issues. The labor movement is going to be highly disliked by the big businesses, the owners, the wealthy, because they will be seen as socialist in a way, trying to take from the wealthy, give everybody the same amount, when in reality they're just asking for regulation of big business. But there will be tactics used to turn people against the labor movement. Women's movement, the women's suffrage movement, getting the right to vote. Remember the Seneca Falls Convention. We get the Declaration of Sentiments, where women came together in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848 to write down the rights that women were owed, the fact that women were to be considered equal to men. The Declaration of Sentiments, modeled after the Declaration of Independence, fighting in the very beginning for the right to vote, all the way up until 1920 when they get the 19th Amendment, finally getting the right to vote. Remember the Populist Party, the People's Party. This party is going to be formed, and many of the ideas will be flushed out, actually passed in the progressive movement. But the Populist Party, the People's Party, another group that we need to remember. A notable third party with William Jennings Bryan, the Populist Party, coming out in the election with William Jennings Bryan, trying to challenge the two major political parties at the time with that idea that kind of tanks him, that we wanted to change the money supply to silver. Remember William Jennings Bryan, the Populist Party. People that we need to know. Muckrakers. Remember, muckrakers were journalists, writers, photographers who were exposing the dark side that had been created during the Gilded Age. Jacob Riis with How the Other Half Lives, showing photographs of the issues that came out in the cities with the living conditions, the working conditions of immigrants in the United States because of the lack of pay, the lack of government regulations. Photographs. Jacob Riis. Ida Tarbell writes The History of Standard Oil, exposing the monopoly that had been created by Rockefeller. Upton Sinclair, you guys read from this, the jungle about the meat packing industry, exposing all of the downsides to no regulation in the meat monopoly in Chicago. The jungle really hit people in the stomach to cause change there. Frank Norris wrote The Octopus, about the railroad industry, the monopoly, and how it was hurting the farmers in the West. We also want to remember our progressive presidents, Teddy Roosevelt, who got the nickname Trust Buster for how much he went after and tried to bust up big business. His successor, who came after him, William Howard Taft, also being an aggressive president against big business. And then we have Woodrow Wilson, our last progressive president, who vowed to take down the dark side of big business, going after the banks, going after the other monopolies, the railroads. We want to remember these three presidents for what they did during their presidency and how they changed the role of the president. Each of these three were strong presidents, not letting Congress take the lead, but taking the lead themselves, changing the role of the president to get involved in social issues instead of taking the back seat. The progressive presidents evolve the role of the presidency. The last category that we have is progressive era reforms. We want to know the 16th Amendment. This was the progressive income tax. The more you make, the more you pay. The 17th Amendment, the direct election of senators, making sure that the people are electing the senators that are going to go on to pass laws that they have to follow, getting the people more directly involved. The 18th Amendment, which was prohibition. Remember, the temperance movement pushes for prohibition. The 19th Amendment, women's right to vote or women's suffrage, being passed in 1920. Initiative, referendum, recall. Remember, these are the three progressive era reforms that increase the participation of the people. Initiative, the people being allowed to petition for a law. Referendum, the people voting on a law that was created by Congress at the state level. Recall, taking officials out of their position before their term was up. Initiative, referendum, recall. Three ways that the progressive reforms got the people more involved. We have the Meat Inspection Act, the Pure Food and Drug Act. These are both a direct effect of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, getting the government to regulate big business, making sure that consumers are protected. And then we have the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve was meant to provide or regulate the economy in the United States, wants to have the goal of a stable economy in the US. The Federal Reserve, and remember this, regulates the money supply, regulates the money supply. And that is all you need to know for your Unit 7 review. Don't forget you can do your study guide for 5 points extra credit. Any questions that you have on anything in this video, please let me know.